Hi and welcome to another of our videos here at Clarion Solicitors about trusts and probate disputes. I'm Lynsey Harrison and I'm head of the team here. In this video I'm going to be joined by Nicholas Choiniere, who is a senior associate solicitor, one of our fantastic team. Nicholas, welcome.
Hi Lynsey.
So one of the types of cases that we often see is where a beneficiary of a trust is really unhappy about what a trustee is doing. Is this something that you're able to help with?
Yes, that's definitely something we can help beneficiaries with. So trustees have a duty of loyalty to the beneficiaries, and that is called a fiduciary duty. And trustees have a bunch of other duties too, essentially to act in the best interests of the beneficiaries. So you'd think everything would work well, but unfortunately it doesn't always act that way. In cases where beneficiaries are unhappy with what the trustees are done, there's all sorts of ways we can intervene to protect the beneficiaries, protect the best interests of the beneficiaries.
So I'm guessing that one of the things that beneficiaries will often ask us to get involved with is to actually remove the trustees and appoint new ones instead.
Yeah, that's a very common situation. If trustees are causing difficulties, you want them out of the way and a new trustee appointed instead. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Sometimes the trustee itself has some powers in there, and it might give someone the power to remove a trustee, appoint a new trustee. Those cases are very straightforward, well, can be very straightforward, and that's great when you have that.
Yeah.
It's not always the case, however. So sometimes you need to go to the law. So there's something called the Trustee Act. And the Trustee Act has different situations in which you can remove a trustee. Sometimes that will be because someone has lost capacity or someone's died and they need to be removed. There's also a really nifty provision of the Trustee Act which allows the court to intervene when it's expedient to do that or when it's not really convenient for a trustee to be removed without the court. A really good example of that might be if, say, there's a company that's gone into dissolution and the company is no longer able to act as trustee.
Yeah. And the most complicated cases are where trustees need to actually be removed by the court, aren't they?
Yes, those tend to be the most complex. I'd say they're especially complex when you have trustees who are hanging on and refusing to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are the rules for removing a trustee through the court?
Well, the court will look at a few things. First and foremost, the court will look at what is in the best interests of the beneficiaries of the trust. The court will also be very concerned about what is favoring the administration of the trust, so what will allow the trust to actually be taken care of properly, administered properly. Those aren't the only considerations, but they're the main ones. But to give a sense, other considerations might be if there has been a breach of trust. Well, that's something the court will be really interested in. If there's been a breach of trust, say someone has stolen money, then the court is likely to remove a trustee. Now, I should say you don't need to prove a breach of trust to remove a trustee. There's all sorts of case law that says you don't need to prove a breach of trust, but it'll be a very good argument to remove somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another consideration might be to know who appointed the current trustees. So if it was the settlor who appointed the trustees, that'll be a very strong consideration for the court to keep the trustees in place. That was the intention of the person who set up the trust, and they won't be very quick to remove a trustee in those cases.
So can you give me some examples of cases where the trustee was removed?
Gladly. In the case of Firkin Flood, for example, a trustee was removed because they'd withheld income payments to a beneficiary, or I should say several beneficiaries of the trust.
Yeah.
Interestingly, most of the other trustees in that case were removed too. And what is to note there is, even though they weren't the ones who were actively doing the wrong act, they were facilitating the person who was doing it by not intervening.
I mean, I can definitely see why a beneficiary would want to remove trustees in that case.
Yeah, no, definitely. To give another example on a similar line is the case of Alkin, and in that case, two trustees were essentially colluding to take money from the trust. So in that case, they were paying money to a company owned by one of the trustees who was a builder. Now, again, in that case, the court removed both trustees even though one of them was profiting. And similar to the Firkin case, that's a really good example of how trustees can be removed for failing to keep the other trustees in check, for instance.
Yeah.
And I'd say the court removed the trustees in that case because they were essentially not trustworthy and couldn't be trusted to protect the trust assets.
Yeah, absolutely. And conflict of interests are another reason to remove trustees as well, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag for judges. If there's a conflict of interest, it will really raise doubts as to whether a person can act as a trustee. Again, you're thinking about that fiduciary duty. You're thinking about protecting the interests of the beneficiaries. And to give an example of a case where there's a conflict of interest, there's a case called Wheatman. That was a case where a trustee was removed for conflict of interest. So to give you a bit of a sense, that case involved a trust which held assets in a company, and one of the trustees was also acting for the company, so they'd been a director, they were very close to the company. And what the beneficiaries said is, well, how can I be sure that this trustee is going to protect my interests when they're so close to the company?
Yeah.
If push comes to shove, are they going to side with me, or are they going to side with the employees? Are they going to side with the company?
Yeah.
And the court said, you know what, that's entirely right. That's entirely appropriate. If there's any question here that the trustee might be on the camp of the employees, then we can't be sure that they will act as trustees and they will be able to fulfill their duties.
Yeah. And are trustees always removed by the court?
No, although I suppose from the cases I've mentioned, you'd think that is the case, but no, they're not always removed. To give an example of a case where trustees were not removed, I'd talk about the case of Kershaw. So in the case of Kershaw, there was a falling out between the trustees and a beneficiary. And the beneficiary was saying they'd mismanaged all sorts of trust assets and did things very poorly. In that case, the court did not remove the trustee. And the reason they did that, well, there's a couple of reasons, but they said, yes, the trustees made some mistakes, but they weren't very serious mistakes. And it's not going to be every mistake that justifies removing a trustee. They also said these trustees had taken legal advice and had followed that legal advice. And when you've got a solicitor telling you what to do, that's a strong indication that the beneficiaries are going to be protected.
Yeah.
You think the solicitor won't tell them to do things that are illegal or are wrong. On balance, the court also thought it's going to be very expensive to get a new trustee appointed. So having weighed all those factors, the court said it's going to be in the best interest of the trust to keep the current trustees in place, notwithstanding they might have made a few minor mistakes.
Minor errors, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And just to wrap up our episode, do you have any particular practical tips that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. I would say if you're acting as a trustee, first thing to do is take legal advice as soon as there's an indication of any dispute. Yeah. You'll know this well. There's a lot we can do at early stages before things really blow out of proportion. The sooner you can get a legal advisor on board, we've seen lots of different situations. We'll often have good practical suggestions for how to address a situation before it gets out of hand. On the beneficiary side of things, if you're a beneficiary, I would say speak to your trustees, keep those channels of communication going. What you often find in the case law with beneficiaries is they will be criticized if they've been too keen to rush off to court, if they've been unreasonable, if they've been unwilling to engage with pragmatic solutions. And what you don't want to be is rushing off, not having those conversations, and then being criticized by a judge down the line.
And they will absolutely criticize you.
They will. You've seen it before. They will absolutely be criticized. Completely agreed.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. That's really helpful. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any queries or any issues around trusts and you want to talk to someone who's a specialist, please do get in touch with us. All the details are on the website. Thank you.
Thanks.